In this video, we're going to show you how to install valve cover gaskets on your Jeep Grand Cherokee located on the top side of your engine. To remove our ground terminal here, we're going to use a 13mm on the nut side and a 13mm on the bolt head side. Go ahead and loosen that. Give that a wiggle, pull that off and set it aside. Do the same on this side here. We're going to use a 13mm, loosen. Our bolt is holding, but this happens to spin. We can hold it with our wrench. Give that a wiggle, pull this up and off. Now on your particular vehicle, down here on the side of the battery, there may be a wedge or a battery hold down block. You want to go ahead and loosen and remove that bolt and remove the block. Our particular vehicle does not have that. So at this point here, we're just going to go ahead and grab the battery, pull it up and set it aside. We're going to remove our upper intake unit here off of the throttle body as well as our air filter. We're going to use our flathead screwdriver and we're going to go ahead and start to loosen this clamp right here. Then we're going to come on over to the top of the air box. I want to undo the retaining clips and reach underneath the little spring clip and lift up on these tabs. There should be a few of these. Lift up on this and wiggle that off. Underneath our intake here, you're going to find a 10mm bolt. We're going to use our extension and 1/4-inch ratchet. Loosen and remove that bolt. Now there's one here and there's one on the passenger side as well that we're going to get to next. On the back side, on the driver's side, there is this vacuum port. We're just going to pull that off. And then we're going to go to the back side. There is a hose clamp that secures the air box here to the throttle body. I'm just going to loosen that up a bit. Now I'm going to grab this here and lift it up. On the side of our throttle body, we have a series of electrical connectors and vacuum tubes. All of this has to come off. So you come on over here, press down on this little clip here, and then wiggle this off. Do the same for the upper one here. There's another sensor down below here. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect that. Okay, to remove our vacuum hoses here. disconnect our 2 cables from the throttle body. I'm going to rotate this back, slide the cable up and out of that notch, and pull the barrel out just like that. This one here is actually just snapped onto a little stud here, so you're going to grab this little plastic component and pull it forward. And pop that stud right out of the little notch on there. Now on the bottom side of our left cable here, there is a little hole or a notch in this metal bracket, and there's a little plastic locking button that holds the cable in place. I'm going to use a small pick here, and I'm going to put it in that notch and push in gently. That's going to press on a little spring-loaded tab, and it's going to unlock, and then you can reach in, grab that cable, and you can slide that out of that notch you can see right here, and then we're going to slide the other one out beside it and disconnect those 2 like so. On the front side of the engine, we want to go ahead and remove our drive belt or serpentine belt. We're down here on our tensioner. We're using a 15mm socket on that pulley. We want to go ahead and pull on this here. Get some slack on that belt. Drop that belt off, and then we'll go ahead and relax that. On the top of our air compressor right here, I want to go ahead and disconnect our electrical connector. So there's a red safety lock tab. I'm going to push that over. I want to try and push this little lock tab over to unlock it. And it's pretty much unlocked when the entire red tab is gone from this side here. And then we can go ahead and push down on this upper tab and separate that. Now I want to go ahead and unbolt the air compressor itself. We're going to go right to this 15mm bolt down here on the passenger side front. Use our 3/8 ratchet. I'm going to loosen and remove this bolt. Now on the other side here, there's a bolt down right here, 15mm. We're going to use our stubby extension, get on in there, loosen and remove this one. This AC line here has a little plastic bracket supported off one of the studs down below. You're just going to push that off to the side. On the back passenger side of the AC compressor, you're going to find a 13mm bolt here. Loosen and remove that. Now what we want to do is loosen our compressor. We're going to wiggle it back and forth using a pry bar to separate that. Lift it up and swing it out. Now we sprayed some rust penetrant down on there to try and break up that little bit of aluminum corrosion. And we got this up and out. So we're just going to swing this off to the side. And on our map sensor here, there's going to be a red lock tab. I want to go ahead and lift up on this. And then we're going to press in on the little tab behind it and pull the connector off. Now we're going to move this connector off of our coolant temp sensor right here. Going to press in on the little tab on the top and go ahead and wiggle that off. And just fold that harness off to the side. The cable going to our alternator is on our fuel rail, just a little metal clip. I'm just going to go ahead and slide this off of our fuel rail. That'll allow us to pull that off to the side a little bit. Using 11/16 socket, go ahead and remove this nut here. This nut is securing a ground strap as well as a wiring harness. We want to go ahead and swing that stuff out of the way. Pull that ground strap off and that harness. I'm just going to throw that nut back on there for now, just to place that. On the passenger side of the intake manifold, you're going to find your oil dipstick tube here. It comes back to a bracket and goes to the intake. Use your 10mm socket and ratchet. You can use a gear wrench too if you want. You want to go ahead, loosen and remove this nut, separating the dipstick tube from the intake. Now along the top here, we have 4 ignition coils on the passenger side, 4 on the driver's side. We want to disconnect all of the electrical connectors going to these here. You're going to press down on the tab on the top and go ahead and work that off. Sometimes they're stuck, so you end up using a pair of pliers. You don't want to crack the plastic, so gently do this if you're using pliers. Okay, we have these all disconnected now. We have a connector right here. We also want to go ahead and separate as well. So press down on that tab, do the same here. Just going to repeat that process for the driver's side here. Okay, we have all of our ignition coil harness separated now. And we'll grab this sensor right here and do the same here. Along the passenger side of the engine here, we're going to find this wiring harness that runs across the top of our valve cover, but just to the right of our fuel line here. We're going to grab the harness and we're going to gently pull up on this here, and this is going to pull up off of the plastic guides or sleeves that hold the harness down in place here. This should allow us to pull back on this harness a little bit. Now pulling back on this harness, there are some wires that come out of this harness that go to our fuel injector, so you don't want to pull too hard on it, but enough to get this up and away so we can get to our fuel injector connections. Now the next thing before we get to those fuel injector connections, on this fuel rail over here, there is a little black screw cap. Now we're going to unscrew this here. And what this is, this gives us access to a Schrader valve for our fuel pressure in our fuel rail. And once you remove this cap here, you want to go ahead and set that aside. Now the next step is put safety glasses on. Super important. What we're going to do is we're going to tuck some towels down underneath here, underneath our fuel rail. And in the center of this valve is going to be a little pin. This is a fuel pressure release here, or this is where you can test your fuel pressure. Now our vehicle has not been running in a little bit, so there probably is no pressure, but what you want to do is press in on this little spring-loaded pin right in the center. If you have fuel pressure, it is going to spray out of there. Safety glasses, make sure you have a towel to go ahead and kind of shield. Press that in, let that fuel pressure come out until there's no pressure left. Once that fuel pressure is released, you can now go ahead and pull your towels out. Each side of our engine is going to have a fuel rail. They're connected by this fuel rail running across the front over to the driver's side. We're on our passenger side right now. Follow the fuel rail down. You're going to find 4 fuel injectors, one here, and then 2 in the back over there. Now the electrode connectors going to it have a red safety lock clip on there. Okay, what you can do is use a screwdriver or a small pick. You can use your finger if you want, but ours are a little stuck. Push up on that safety clip and they'll stop. Then you want to press in on this little spring tab here and pull that harness off. You want to go ahead and repeat this process for the other 7. Right in the middle over here, just above the valve cover, you're going to find this plastic bracket that goes underneath your 2 AC lines. Now there's 2 U-shaped supports on there that hold the AC line. You can grab the AC lines and literally just pop them right out of it. And when you use a tool here to go ahead and pull this up and off, this is the component that we just removed, and it just slides down over one of the valve cover studs here. This is going to give us a little more room to go ahead and pull our wiring harness over to get to the back 2 injectors. Now that we have all 4 of the injectors removed on this side here, we can go ahead and pull that harness up. You can use a rag on your throttle body, or I'll just use an old glove. Just put that on there. That'll protect anything from blowing inside of this. You want to keep this clean as well. In order to remove our battery tray, we have to go ahead and pop up our fuse block right here. Now there's going to be locking tabs securing this to the retainer. We're going to use a flathead screwdriver, and there are little tabs. We want to go ahead and push those in towards the block itself. It's going to dislodge the clip. Do the same here as you're gently pulling up. Now following this expansion tube right here for our radiator, I'm going to go ahead and use your trim tool and pop up on the little plastic retainer that attaches this to the battery tray. Pop that up. That's going to allow you to pull this up and out of the way a little bit. Grab that fuse block and lift that up. With this up, that's going to give you access to a bolt going through our battery tray into the side of our fender. Now we're going to use an 8mm with our socket and extension. Go ahead and remove that screw or bolt. Through this hole on our battery tray, there's going to be a 10mm nut down below on a stud. Going to use our 10mm socket and extension. Go ahead and remove that nut. I'm just going to reach down back here. Drop that nut into my other hand and pull that up. Now right up on the front passenger side here, there's a little hole or pocket. There's another 10mm bolt in there. Now there's one last bolt that was normally up on the front side of this bracket, but ours is missing. That would normally be a 10 millimeter. Also, go loosen and remove that if your vehicle is equipped with it. Now at this point here, once you get those out, we need to pop out our fuse block again. It popped back into place. Need to separate that, and we need to remove our battery tray here. Now, as you're pulling out the battery tray, on the bottom side of this battery tray, right underneath this center button here, is an electrical connector. You're gonna reach out underneath, you're gonna grab the little connector, and there's a little push tab or lock on the side. You're gonna pinch it and pull the connector off. Once you have that electrical connector off, you just want to go ahead and manipulate everything out of the way so you can go ahead and wiggle this up and out. And you pull this out. Here is a connector right here. There's a little tab you'll be pushing down on to release that from the bottom side of the battery tray. The next thing we want to do is disconnect our two heater hoses here from the side of the motor. Now before we do so, you want to put a drain bucket underneath, a catch can to catch any coolant that comes out of these hoses. Your other option is to go ahead and open up the petcock on the radiator and drain the cooling system that way there. But we're going to go ahead and tackle it this way here. I'm going to go ahead and loosen the hose clamps for this here. We're going to do the lower one first. And then once we bring that hose clamp up and away, let's go ahead and get that hose worked off and let that start to drain. I'm just trying to twist that loose. Here we go. Start to work that up. And once some of that coolant starts to dribble, I'm going to work that up a little bit by hand. I'm going to go ahead and slide this harness off this bolt right here. I'm going to pop this heater hose out of the retainer, and with that pulled out, I'm going to go ahead and get to the line that was up above it. Do the same here. Gotta loosen up that clamp, and we'll slide that up and then pull that hose off. Now at this point here, we're losing a little bit of coolant here, so we want to be sure to top that off once we reassemble everything. I want to go ahead and get our heater hoses out of the way here, so I'm going to pull them up, tuck them behind the electrical harness here. That's going to allow us to pull that right up and out of the way. Same thing with the lower hose here. On the back side right here, we have our PCV hoses, vacuum. I want to go ahead and pull this rubber hose off. So go ahead and gently wiggle that out like that. And then we're going to twist this twist it down And you're basically unlocking it off of the fill tube. There's a little tab right here that you're unlocking from the oil fill tube. Let's go ahead and set that aside. Now we want to go ahead and remove our oil fill tube here to the front side of the cylinder head here. And there's a series of 10mm bolts. It's actually 4 of them, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. And the bottom one here is covered by our heater tube bracket. Now this just presses on here. Sometimes you'll need a trim tool or something to get behind there and pop that off. Well, let's go ahead and remove these now. We're going to use our deep socket with our 10mm. I'm just using a 1/4 inch ratchet with our deep socket and a little extension. I'm just breaking these bolts free, and then we'll go ahead and zip this off. Now these 3 bolts are all the same size, and then the lower left bolt is the stud. So I just want to pay attention to the placement on that. Grab the oil fill tube, just gently wiggle it, and that'll come off. Go ahead and set that aside. I'm just going to put a towel inside this here. Don't want to risk anything getting inside there. Our plastic PCV hose here runs around to the back into a rubber hose. We're just going to go ahead and pull that out. We can set that aside. We have our wiring harness here for our fuel injectors and coils. I want to make sure that we can pull this up a little bit. We're just checking to make sure we have clearance to get to all of the valve cover bolts and studs around the perimeter, and we'll be able to have room to pull the valve cover up and off. On the front leading edge of the passenger side cylinder head here, there's an electrical connector that goes up to a sensor. On the back side on ours is a little push tab. We want to go ahead and separate that harness. So just push in it, pop this off. And that is going to allow us a little more room to move this harness around as we need to. On the bottom stud of our valve cover here, there is a hose bracket. I'm just going to pull that up and off of the stud. And this is one of the heater hose supports. Set that aside. Now we're going to use a 10mm deep socket and extension to go ahead and start to remove the bolts and studs holding the valve cover in place. Now very, very critical, you want to pay attention to the placement of the studs. On the top here, there are 3 in a row, right in line with the valve cover. Down below, we have a stud on the leading edge, the second one in. Then it skips, goes to a bolt, and then 2 more studs, and then it goes to 2 bolts in the back. So I want to remember that as we take this apart. Now we're going to switch over to 1/4 inch ratchet and socket here to get to the rearward bolts and studs. Now, in order to get to our 2 back bolts, it is very, very complicated to get back there. Now, you're going to reach down on the back here, and there's going to be a plastic tube that runs up along the back of the firewall, and that comes down to an elbow on the back side of the valve cover area, and you want to grab that hose and pull that off. It's just pressed onto a metal nipple down there. You're going to pull that up and pull that over. That's going to allow you to reach back there and get access to that upper bolt on the back side of that valve cover. So right at the back lower corner of the valve cover, we have the bolt. It's right up against the firewall. We're going to end up using a 1/4 inch 10mm shallow socket, possibly a swivel socket and extension. Now that we have this bolt broken, we're going to go ahead, I'm going to switch over to my 1/4 inch air ratchet and go ahead and zip that bolt out the rest of the way. Okay. Now that we have that lower back bolt unthreaded, let's go ahead and move to the upper rearward bolt. On our back upper bolt here, using our 1/4 inch ratchet and a couple extensions. I'm going to spin that bolt the rest of the way with the extensions in the socket. Let's grab our valve cover here. Pull that up. Now we're just going to want to manipulate our harness up and out of the way as we work this valve cover up and out. On the back side, you're just going to have to work that wire harness up and out of the way. And that's really what's in the way here, causing this little resistance coming out. As we're pulling this out, our valve cover gasket is actually stuck to the cylinder head, which was getting caught on the camshaft as we were removing it. Let's go ahead and bring this over to the bench, get it cleaned up, and get the new gasket installed. I'm going to go ahead and start by just removing the old valve cover gasket. You can hear that crunching. It's just dry rotted and just splitting. It's cracking. So definitely causing an oil leak. Next thing we want to do is remove our studs and bolts here. Now there are rubber grommets holding these in. So you can work these here and wiggle them out. The other thing you can do is use a trim tool and pop these out. But in most cases, you can just wiggle them out and it comes out with a rubber grommet. Now I went ahead and grabbed a piece of cardboard here, about the length of our valve cover, and I'm going to go ahead and mark where these bolts and studs are coming out of because they need to go back in the same location. Now I'm just going to put top here for the top of our valve cover. And for example, the one that we just popped out here is our third bolt in. I'm just going to push that through that cardboard like so. I'm going to repeat this process as we remove these here from the valve cover. Go ahead and pop out that last stud there. Now we have everything organized here accordingly. You want to go ahead and clean your valve cover now of any residual grease and dirt, stuff like that. We're going to go ahead and do that in our wash basin, and then we're going to come back and install our new gaskets. Now we have our valve cover all cleaned up here. Let's go ahead and start to replace these grommets. You're going to take one of the studs here or bolts, and you can see the rubber grommet on here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a razor blade and carefully just slice down the rubber. You can do whatever way you want to go ahead and remove these, you can do that. We're just going to slice them and peel them right off. It makes it pretty easy. Wipe that down. And I'm going to take one of the new gaskets here. Make sure that the flare side faces down. Grab that and go ahead and work that on. Push that up into place. Now you want to go ahead and press this onto the valve cover. Line that up and just pop that in. This particular one pulled out of the rubber grommet on the valve cover. So we're just going to go ahead and slide this on. Now we're going to repeat this process for the rest of the bolts and studs. Now I took the old gasket, laid that out, and I matched up our new gasket to it here. Now I'm just going to transfer that over to our valve cover here. Going to line up our valve cover gasket and start to press that in. And the gasket itself will pretty much line itself up as you go. All the grooves are already put in there, all the curves, bends. I'll work my way back around, making sure that the gasket is fully seated and all of the groove all the way around. And our valve cover is ready for installation. Next step, we want to go ahead and clean off our cylinder head. We have some garbage around here, some dirt and things like that. We want to make sure that our gasket surface is clean and free of any debris. So we're just going to use a cloth here and some spray solvent. Spray it down, and we want to go ahead and just wipe it down. We want to be careful not to wipe all kinds of garbage into the cylinder head itself, but just kind of wipe it down and away, and do so all the way around the perimeter until you have a good clean surface. I'm going to take our valve cover and slowly work that down inside. Being careful not to catch that gasket on anything. Now you periodically want to check, run your hand along that valve cover, especially around the back side. That is normally the section that is going to catch and peel out of that valve cover. And that is just going to expose a huge oil leak as soon as you turn that key and get that engine fired up. Now once you have the valve cover into position and all of the bolts and studs line up, you definitely want to reach around the back side here, and if you have a mirror, go ahead and double check. Feel and make sure that gasket is still seated on the back side. Once that is all set, then go ahead and we can start to thread in our bolts and studs. And we want to do this for all of these here. Now you might have to grab that valve cover and just gently wiggle it in order to get those studs to line up just right. You want to start all these by hand first so you don't cross thread any of them. I'm going to repeat this process for all of the hardware. I want to go ahead and snug all these bolts down gently. Once we complete snugging them all down, we'll come back and torque them down. Now we want to go ahead and torque down our studs and bolts here. You want to do that to 105 inch-pounds or 8.75 foot-pounds. With the valve cover secured, and go ahead and bring that harness back down into position. I'm going to install our vacuum hose right here that presses onto the back side over here. All right, that's pressed onto the back side. On the oil fill here, we're going to pull out our towel. We want to use some spray solvent. We want to clean the surface of this here. Spray it onto a rag or a towel, and go ahead and clean this off. Get this ready for the installation. The key thing here is making sure that the surface is clean so that the gasket seals properly. And once that's all cleaned up, we'll go ahead and install our component. Now we have our oil fill tube right here. What you want to do is pay attention to the oil O-ring gasket right here going around. Inspect that carefully. Look for any tears, or if it's really old, if you have 100,000 miles or more on this here, it's probably going to be a good choice to go ahead and replace this O-ring seal. Good way to check this here is turn it sideways and see if the gasket is protruding up above the plastic housing itself. If it is, that should seal up pretty good. If not, if it seems like it's crushed down below or flush with the housing itself, you definitely want to replace it. Otherwise, you're going to introduce an oil leak and you're going to end up with a mess and you're going to have to do the job twice. So go ahead and address that if need be. Let's go ahead and get ours installed. Now the stud goes on the lower left section here. And go ahead and get that bolt started. All right, we have all four started by hand. I'm just going to thread these in as far as I can by hand. That's going to save ratcheting time. They're spinning in nice and easy. Using your 8mm socket, go ahead and snug these down. Now this plastic has a metal sleeve, So what you want to do is just basically, once that bolt bottoms out, just give it a little bit more. Once it bottoms out, a little bit more. You see, I'm not even doing a full quarter turn on that once that's seated. I'm just going to come back to the first one, just double check that. You just want to make sure those are snug. You want to come on over here to our connector. Want to pull that up and press it onto the sensor on the bottom of the head. And you're going to feel it and hear it click into place. You want to take our heater hoses here, get these lined up. I'm going to push that on and get our clamp on that. And then we'll put on our lower hose here. And once we have those two heater hose clamps installed, we want to take our wire harness here with that little tab on it. We want to push this onto the valve cover stud right there. Then we have the harness right here with that plastic eyelet. That presses on there as well. I'm going to install our hose support on the upper valve cover stud. On the front side, we have our hose support right here, and this presses on to the stud for the oil fill tube. And then we'll snap our heater hoses into that, like so. I'm going to install our PCV plastic tube here. It runs underneath our transmission right there, transmission dipstick. Push that into the plastic tube. We have our PCV right here. I want to go ahead and install that. And press in our vacuum tube. Let's install our battery tray. For ease of installation, we're just going to pop off this expansion tube hose off our radiator and just tuck that off to the side. Before that drops down into place, reach underneath, grab that connector, and pop that on. You're gonna feel it, hear that snap into place, and work that tray down. Get that tray put onto the stud on the back side. It'll drop down. I'm going to install the nut on the stud on the back side here. And we just want to get that nut started. We're not going to tighten this down yet. Let's go ahead and install the bolts on this here. Whatever bolt that goes through. Now on our battery tray, we only had the nut and 2 bolts holding it. Your particular vehicle, you probably have the 4th bolt on the front side. You go ahead and get that one started as well. Once you have that in, come on back, and we want to snug these all down. Once you have all of your pieces of hardware tightened down, pop in your fuse block here, line that up on the tabs, just push it down so you hear it lock into place. Take your expansion tank hose. You want to put your plastic tab onto the corner of the battery tray. Lock that down and into place, and then install the hose on your radiator. You want to install the wire harness onto your ignition coils and your fuel injectors. Push it on, you're going to hear them click in, and then push your red lock tabs down into place. And then take your ignition coil wire, line that up and push that on. You're going to hear those click in. I'm going to continue that process all the way down. As we also go down here, we have the sensor right here. Install the harness onto that. Go ahead and line up the AC compressor. Swing that around into place. We're going to take our longer bolt here. We're going to slide this through the front. We're just going to use our mallet here or dead blow hammer to go ahead and tap this down so we can get that bolt hole to line up. And feed that in, and we'll get that bolt started here. Take the thicker bolt, I'm going to line that up over here and just tap this, get that to line up. Get that started, and then we'll take the longer, thinner bolt and get that started on the back side. Let's go ahead and snug down our 15mm bolts. And then we'll snug down our 13mm bolt on the back side. I'm going to come back with a ratchet. Just want to make sure that these are good and snug. I'm going to feed our AC compressor wire down underneath the power wire on the alternator. Bring that underneath the AC line, and and then onto the connector. Push that on. You're going to feel it and hear it snap in, and then press the lock to engage that. Then we're going to spin up our bracket for the AC line and snap that on. Now that we have our belt set up ready to go, we're going to use our 15mm socket. Let's go ahead and move that tensioner and get that belt put on. Now when you're releasing the tension on the belt, you want to inspect, make sure that the belt is completely on all of the pulleys and all of the ribs are lined up. Now on your particular airbox, you may have a 10mm bolt on the outside holding the unit in. Ours is broken, but go ahead and remove that 10mm bolt on the side there. Once that's out, you can go ahead and pull up on this box. I'm going to twist this out with the air inlet tube right here. Go ahead and set that aside. Follow this wire harness down and it should be attached to the valve cover stud. Just pull that up and off. There's a little plastic retainer there. We're going to continue our way back. I'm going to go ahead and separate the harness, pull this up and away. Now as we pull up our harness here, our fuel line right here is actually keeping us from getting the harness up and out of the way completely. Now you do not have to remove this fuel line in order to do this job. However, it makes the job 10 times easier. In order to do so, we're going to go ahead and fold down our lock here, disconnecting that, and pull the locking jaw out of the fuel line here. Now before tackling this here, you may have some fuel pressure in this line here. We're going to put some towels down here to catch any residual fuel that might dribble out. Now our engine has not been running in a little bit, so it probably won't have fuel pressure in it. If it does, it'll probably be a quick spurt or spray of fuel. We're going to use our fuel line disconnect tool right here. This slides over the fuel line and it goes inside the fuel line. So what we're going to do is push the fuel line in, push the disconnect tool into it. It disconnects the locking collar inside, and then you wiggle the fuel line off and pull that off. Now we didn't have any fuel pressure on ours. If yours is dribbling a little bit of fuel, it will stop. This is going to allow us to go ahead and lift this up a little bit higher out of the way. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a securing strap here. I'm going to hook it up to the hood and I'm just going to pull this up and out of the way. Using our 10mm deep socket and extension, go ahead and start loosening the bolts. On that back lower bolt, it is very close to the firewall, so I switched over some 1/4 inch components here to fit back here and allow for a little bit more clearance. Now these bolts won't come out, they're just like the other side. They're stuck into the rubber grommets. See if we can loosen that valve cover. Here we go. Now our valve cover gasket is stuck to the engine, so I'm just going to reach down there with my finger and peel that off. Let's go ahead and work that valve cover up and away. I'm going to undo our securing strap to allow this harness to come forward a bit. We're going to repeat the same process as we did for the passenger side as we are for the driver's side. Remove the gasket. I want to remove our studs and bolts here. As we're removing these here, we're going to use the same cutout as we had for the passenger side. We're just going to flip it because the angle of the valve cover is just a little bit different. Same holes. All right, all of our studs and bolts are out. I'm going to go ahead and get this cleaned up, and then we'll come on back and get our gaskets installed. Remove your rubber grommet and replace it with a new one. And do the same as we did on the passenger side. You can use a razor blade or any other means that you have to remove these here. Go ahead and press on the new one. And repeat that process for the rest of them. Now that we have all of our new O-ring gaskets on the bolts and studs, we can go ahead and install these. And just do this for all of them. Once you have those in, flip this over. We're going to install our rubber gasket here. I'm going to match up our gasket. On one far end has a little ear on it, and then there's two little round dimples that goes down this end here, and the ear is going to go on the top side. So this is going to get flipped. I'm going to press that into place, get that into the groove, and then just work your way around the perimeter, pressing this in. Inspect the gasket, look around, make sure that the gasket is fully seated all the way around. Once that's fully seated and locked in, it's ready for installation. Before we install our valve cover, I want to go ahead and clean off the cylinder head here where the gasket is going to set. Now what we're going to do is use a towel here. You can use a shop rag, spray some solvent on there. You want to go around the perimeter here, wiping the surface. Make sure that it's clean of any debris, any old oil. You want to make sure that that has a nice clean surface for that gasket to seal up against. Now when feeding your valve cover in, you want to make sure that that gasket doesn't peel out. So periodically, you're going to reach underneath and just make sure that that gasket is seated as we're moving along. Here's that point where we run our hand down and around, mainly in the back, because you just fed that valve cover in, and the chances of it bumping up against that camshaft is very likely. All right, our gasket looks like it is intact and in place. I'm going to go ahead and re-secure everything up and out of the way, allowing us a little bit of freedom here to work on these bolts. Now we're just going to manipulate that valve cover around, try and get some of these bolts started here. Now we're going to go around, we're going to snug down all of our bolts and studs. Now when tightening these down, you want to just make sure that the bolt is bottomed out. You don't want to over tighten these here, so gently go around and just snug them. Now we want to go ahead and torque these down. It's going to be 105 inch-pounds or 8.75 foot-pounds. There's really no pattern to this here. And you're just going to continue this process for all of the bolts. Now that we have our cover secured, I'm going to go ahead and remove my securing strap, get that out of the way, and bring our harness down into place. Let's get that fuel line installed. All we have to do is line that up and push it in, and you're going to feel it and hear it snap on. And then we're going to install our lock here. So we're going to feed this in to the bottom and then fold this down. That'll lock into place. Let's go ahead and install all of our fuel injector and ignition coil harnesses. And we have our other sensor right here. Going to install that. Our harness has these plastic retainers that push down onto the valve cover studs. And we'll kind of get those lined up. And on the front side here, we have that little plastic locking tab to press onto that forward stud. Push that down and on. Install our upper air box. We're going to remove our glove there. Now installing this here, you have the two installation rubber grommets here, as well as the hose clamp on the back side. Go ahead and line that up onto the throttle body. Push that in. And as that lines up, go ahead and get our bolts installed. Once you get that bolt started there, repeat for the other side. And once you have those started, you want to go ahead and just gently snug those down. Install your vacuum hose here. And then on the back side, use your flathead screwdriver and tighten down that hose clamp. Want to make sure that's good and snug. When I install our airbox lid here, you want to make sure that the four locking clips are flipped outward. Line this up. We're going to feed the intake tube here onto the box, the upper portion here. Go ahead and press our lid down and on, and put our locks on. I'm going to make sure that this is fully seated, and then secure the hose clamp. Make sure that's snug. Go ahead and install your battery. I'm going to use our 13mm socket and tighten this down. We use a 13mm wrench to hold the head side of the battery bolt. And let's go ahead and snug this down. Now, if your vehicle has a battery hold-down wedge or block, you want to go ahead and install that. Our particular vehicle does not have one installed. I'm going to snug that gently. Now, with your radiator cap off and your funnel in place, you now want to go ahead and start to fill the cooling system with the recommended coolant from the manufacturer. Now, at this point here, our radiator is filled up. We're going to put our plug in here. We are going to lose a tiny bit at the top when we undo this here. Install your radiator cap. And you're all set.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.